I'm Chris, and today we're going to rebuild the carburetor on this 50-year-old snowblower. Let's do this real quick. There might be a few reasons as to why you might need to rebuild the carburetor on your engine. If it's just not running right and you've tried adjusting it, it feels like it's not getting enough fuel, and you've checked the fuel lines and everything else checks out okay, you might need to put in a carburetor rebuild kit, especially if you notice fuel leaking from the bowl or anywhere on the carburetor itself. I like to start off by removing the fuel cap and closing the fuel shutoff on the tank itself, and then removing the fuel line and placing it inside the fuel tank just to avoid any type of fuel spillage. Next, I'll remove the throttle control lever just to make getting at the carburetor and getting the carburetor itself out of there just a little bit easier. Most carburetors like this are just held in place by two bolts that bolt straight to the engine. Remove the throttle linkage from the carburetor, throttle lever, and the governor arm. It's also a good idea to dump out any remaining fuel that might be left in the carburetor bowl itself. Remove the bowl retaining screw and gasket so that you can remove the carburetor bowl. Take the old Baffle gasket off, and then carefully remove the float pin. And then take the float off itself. And then the easiest way to get the fuel inlet needle out is to simply dump it out. Make sure you remove every piece of the bowl gasket if it's falling apart like mine was. Take care and use caution when removing the fuel inlet seat. Sometimes it could be a little bit difficult to remove. Be extremely careful when removing and installing the main fuel adjusting needle and the idle fuel adjusting needle. You don't want to damage the tips of the needle at all. Use a small piece of wire to clean out any holes or jet ports in the needle itself. Also, clean up and remove the idle speed adjusting screw. You want to clean out every single port and hole in the carburetor body itself. It's also a good idea to clean off the choke and throttle plate in the carburetor body. You might also want to clean off the whole entire outside of the carburetor body itself, just for good measure. Clean out and clean off all the gum and grime that might be in the bowl and on the float itself of the carburetor. Once everything is dried off and there's no carb and choke cleaner left anywhere on the carburetor, it's time to start reassembling everything. Make sure to put the correct gasket on the fuel inlet seat and then go ahead and reinstall. Be careful when reinstalling. You don't want to strip out any threads in there. Insert the new fuel inlet needle into the fuel inlet seat. Now we can install the old float with the new float pin through the float towers and hinge. Be sure to get the new bowl gasket down into its proper seating position. There's really only one way to install the new baffled gasket for this carburetor. Don't forget to put the correct gasket onto the bowl retaining screw, and then go ahead and reinstall your bowl. You don't want to over tighten the bowl retaining screw. You want it tight enough so that everything seals, but you don't want it too tight to where you might break something or even damage the bowl itself. Do not over tighten the main fuel adjusting needle or the idle fuel adjusting needle. It's best really just to tighten it by hand till it barely bottoms out, and then you want to go ahead and back it off the recommended number of turns, which is usually anywhere from a turn and a quarter to 2 turns. Reinstall the idle speed adjusting screw, and you can really fine tune that once you have everything mounted back on the engine. Reconnect the throttle linkage from the governor arm to the carburetor throttle lever, and then bolt the carburetor and gasket back to the engine. Reconnect the throttle control back to the carburetor body itself. Now all we have to do is take our fuel line and reconnect that up and make sure we secure it so it doesn't leak anywhere. Don't forget to open up the fuel shutoff located underneath the tank. It's a good idea to double check that you have reconnected everything in its proper order. This is the moment of truth, when you go to start it up for the first time to really see how everything runs. Be sure to give it enough time to warm up before you really start fine-tuning the adjustments on your carburetor. After you have made the initial adjustments on the carburetor and allowed the engine to warm up, basically adjusting the carburetor any further is really just turning the main fuel inlet needle clockwise until the engine starts to die down a little bit, marking that position and then turning it counterclockwise until it does the same thing, marking that position and then turning it towards the midpoint right where the sweet spot is. And if you can, you really want to try to get everything under load and see how it operates then and make any fine-tuning adjustments after that. When I first started working on this snowblower, the fuel and the lines and the carburetor had gummed up so much, everything was just solid. I had to completely replace the fuel lines. The gas in the gas tank was ridiculously disgusting and solidified, and it took quite a bit to get that gas removed from there. But it's a nice feeling to get this thing running and actually throw some snow with it. I thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, and you found this video helpful in getting your snowblower running, please leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much.